Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes locked onto Lilith's provocative form. She smiled, her red eyes smoldering as she beckoned him closer with a curl of her finger. "Don't be shy, dear, I promise I won't hurt you. Much." He hesitated, his heart pounding in a mix of apprehension and arousal. Lilith chuckled, her voice a low purr that seemed to resonate deep within him. "Would you prefer I came to you, Ethan?" She rose from the chaise, her hips swaying seductively as she stalked towards him. Ethan swallowed hard, his mouth dry as Lilith circled him like a predator. She leaned in, her breath hot on his ear. "You're a delicious little thing, aren't you?" she murmured, her fingers tracing a line down his chest, lingering on the waistband of his shorts. "I could just eat you up." He shivered at her touch, his body responding despite his nerves. Lilith smiled, her hand sliding lower to cup his growing erection. There we go," she purred. "No need to be afraid. I know you want this." Ethan let out a shaky breath, his hips involuntarily pressing into her touch. Lilith chuckled, her other hand moving to stroke her own growing bulge. "You see, Ethan, I have something most women don't. A little extra." She leaned in, her lips brushing against his. "Would you like to see?" He nodded, his breath hitching as Lilith stepped back and slowly unzipped her skirt. It fell to the floor, revealing her impressive length, already hard and glistening. Ethan's eyes widened, his heart pounding as Lilith closed the distance between them once more. "Touch me, Ethan," she whispered, guiding his hand to her shaft. He tentatively wrapped his fingers around her, marveling at the silky smoothness of her skin. Lilith let out a soft moan, her hips thrusting gently into his touch. "That's it, dear. Just like that." Emboldened, Ethan began to stroke her, his grip tightening as Lilith's moans grew louder. She kissed him deeply, her tongue exploring his mouth as her hands roamed his body. She deftly unbuttoned his shorts, pushing them down along with his boxers, his erection springing free. Lilith broke the kiss, her eyes gleaming with lust as she looked down at him. "Very nice," she murmured, her hand wrapping around his length. She stroked him slowly, her thumb circling the sensitive tip. Ethan gasped, his hips bucking into her touch. "Now, Ethan," Lilith purred, her voice laced with dark promise. "Let me introduce you to the pleasures of my dual sex." She guided him to the chaise, pushing him gently onto his back. She straddled him, her breasts heaving as she leaned down to kiss him once more. Ethan could feel her hardness pressing against his own, the sensation strange but exhilarating. Lilith reached between them, her hand wrapping around both their lengths. She began to stroke them together, the friction sending waves of pleasure coursing through Ethan's body. He moaned, his hands gripping her hips as she moved against him. "Do you like that, Ethan?" she whispered, her breath hot on his neck. "Do you like the feel of me against you?" He nodded, his body aching with desire. Lilith smiled, her eyes locked onto his as she shifted her position, guiding the tip of her shaft to his entrance. Ethan tensed, his heart pounding in a mix of fear and anticipation. "Shh, dear," Lilith soothed, her voice gentle. "I promise I'll be gentle, at first." She pressed into him slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Ethan gasped, his body stretching to accommodate her. There was pain, but it was mixed with a pleasure unlike anything he had ever known. Lilith began to move, her hips thrusting gently as she filled him completely. Ethan's hands gripped her hips, his body moving in sync with hers. The sensation of her inside him was overwhelming, his nerves alight with pleasure. Lilith leaned down, her breasts pressing against his chest as she kissed him deeply. "You feel incredible, Ethan," she murmured, her pace quickening. "I knew you would be a delight." Ethan could feel his climax building, his body tensing as Lilith drove into him. She reached between them, her hand wrapping around his length, stroking him in time with her thrusts. The dual sensation was too much, and Ethan cried out, his release spilling over her hand. Lilith threw her head back, her own climax following closely behind. She collapsed on top of him, her body trembling with the force of her orgasm. They lay there for a moment, their breaths mingling as they came down from their shared high. Eventually, Lilith rolled off him, her body shimmering as her shaft receded. She smiled at him, her eyes soft with satisfaction. And that, dear Ethan, is just a taste of what the mansion has to offer.